From a young age, Rudd always found himself chasing after his older brother. No matter how hard he ran, he was always left behind. Even on the days when he felt he was finally catching up, his brother would remain far ahead, just out of reach, turning back only to say that Rudd could eventually reach him. That distant encouragement made Rudd seethe. He resented that kind of kindness simply handed to him because they were related by blood. He viewed his brother's kindness not as love, but as pity, and that made it unbearable. That's all he believed about his older brother for the longest time, until he realized how wrong he was. One day, he recalled something a classmate had once told him. "You've got a short fuse and average skills, yet you act like you're better than everyone." At the time, he had brushed it off as a joke. But now it felt like a brutal truth. He had been a fool, a complete fool, to harbor so much hate for the one person who had always shielded him. His brother wasn't just a person running ahead. He was someone who cleared the path, who stood at the front lines to protect him, always bearing the brunt of the danger. And now, that brother was gone, dead because of him. And that truth, that crushing weight of guilt, forced Rudd to keep going, not for himself, but for his brother's memory. That battle, the one with the sky-born dragon race, had decimated nearly everyone. Only a handful, including Rudd, had made it out alive, bleeding and broken, missing an arm and a leg. He could feel death creeping in, but he wasn't going to die empty-handed. He was determined to take some of those dragon bastards with him. Just as he pushed himself forward with that grim resolve, he saw something strange in the distance. A figure, part human, part something else. It stood on two legs, both bound together, and had wings. The sight baffled him. What was it? It took him a long moment to make sense of it. There was something regal, something ominous in the way that figure carried itself. Could this be the king of the dragon race? That didn't make sense. Every single one of the dragon kings had fallen, slain by Rudd's comrades and his brother. So why did this one still stand? Stranger still, Rudd couldn't feel any aura from him. Nothing to hint at power. And yet, every part of Rudd screamed that this being was dangerous. The figure spoke, casually asking if Rudd was the only one left alive. There was no time to analyze or hesitate. The only option was to strike. With everything he had left, Rudd made his move. He lunged with his sword, cleaving the figure's head clean in two. But before he could even process the blow, the man calmly said, "Wait, let's talk." A blinding white flash engulfed Rudd, and suddenly, everything changed. He opened his eyes to find himself in a completely different place. A city. Was this the past? Was he alive? Just as he tried to gather his bearings, a voice rang out, welcoming new students to the Dragon Annihilation Academy, Aristium. This was the entrance ceremony, the exact same day he had experienced years ago. Everything looked so familiar, and he began questioning if the war, the battles, his brother's death, had all of it been a dream? But no, he remembered it all too vividly. Even that strange man from moments ago, had he gone back in time? No magic, at least none he knew, had the power to send someone into the past, especially not wielded by a dragon. Only a god could manage that. If this truly was divine intervention, then so be it. Rudd swore that this time he would do it right. He wouldn't lose anyone again. As he stepped further into the academy, he saw a familiar face, Henith. She hadn't changed. He called her name. She turned, confused, asking if he knew her. Playing it cool, he said she was famous, and that everyone should know who she was. She seemed satisfied with the explanation. Her first words to him were asking if he was crazy. She had seen him talking and cursing to himself. He brushed it off, amused at how little she had changed. She called him a pervert and turned away. They listened to the entrance speech together, and as it dragged on, she noted how long and boring it was. He agreed, expecting that if he didn't respond, she'd hound him for hours. She mentioned that as a magician from the Harpula family, patience was her minimum virtue. Then she asked his name. When he gave it, she said she had never heard of him or his family. She started to boast again, but stopped herself, remembering her mother's warnings about belittling families with weak lineage. He told her he knew quite a bit about the school and offered to share information. He pointed to the guild leaders on the second floor, saying they were scouting for talent. When he looked at them, he recognized their faces and even knew how they'd die in the war. Henith said they couldn't join a guild until their third year, but she already had her eyes set on one. The Midsummer Flames, led by her role model, Liana. Then came the oath. As Rudd walked forward to make his pledge, he waited, expecting his brother, Aesir, to be announced next. But the name never came. Instead, Jeremy Duville, Aesir's best friend, stepped forward as the student council president. Rudd's heart dropped. What was happening? Why wasn't Aesir here? After the ceremony, he ran to Jeremy and asked about his brother. Jeremy's face was blank. He had never heard the name Aesir before. Rudd felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath his feet. Could it be that Aesir didn't exist in this version of the world? Was it possible that while he regressed to this school, Aesir regressed to somewhere else? Either way, he had to find him. He couldn't bear the thought of a world without his brother. Just then, Henneth caught up with him, noticing he was deep in thought. When he said he was searching for someone, she offered advice. Go to the school library and check the student registry. He immediately got up and rushed toward the library, dragging Henneth along, even though she reminded him they had class in 15 minutes. While they walked, she asked him why he had confronted the council president. Was he just seeking attention? He brushed her off, saying he had his reasons. She was surprised at how he already knew his way around the campus. Freshmen typically didn't know the layout. He simply replied that it was normal to research your new school beforehand. When they reached the library, Henneth went off to read about new magic, while Rudd got to work. He searched for Aesir's name. Nothing. He wasn't there. That confirmed it. If his brother wasn't in this version of the world, it could only mean one thing. The Void Dragon, Sartan, who had disappeared with Aesir's body during the war, had taken him to another dimension. That meant Aesir might still be alive, but Sartan would be there too. Rudd closed the book and got ready to leave for class. He called for Henneth, only to find her trying to borrow 13 books at once. The librarian denied her and called an authority figure, prompting them to dash out of the library to avoid getting in trouble. They made it to class just in time. Once seated, Henneth asked Rudd if he'd found the person he was searching for. He shook his head and finally told her it was his brother he was looking for. Soon after, their teacher entered, Daniel Gold. He introduced himself as their basic combat instructor for the first year and explained that in their second year and beyond, they'd also be taught weaponry and martial arts. He emphasized that if they wanted to survive at Iridium, they'd need to earn both strength and talent through hard work. One student asked about the dormitories, prompting the students to head out. Henneth followed the crowd, but Rudd walked in the opposite direction. Henneth called after him, teasing that he didn't know the dorms yet, even though she didn't know where the library was earlier. But Rudd had another plan. He went to the training room he'd visited in his past life. He wanted to test whether his body, now younger, could still handle any real training. He tried to push himself, but his body quickly gave out. Of course, he reminded himself he was only 17 again. There was nothing he could do about it, at least not yet. He reflected on how he didn't like much about this regression. Soon, they'd start combat training. A week after that, sparring would begin. If he didn't want history to repeat itself, he had to work harder this time. He started pushing himself to build up endurance, lifting weights and repeating drills. Just as he was deep in his training, another student arrived. Balac Steros. Rudd recognized him instantly from his previous life. Balac, a friend back then, would go on to become the Fist King. But this meeting was unexpected. In his previous life, they hadn't met this early. That was another sign. Things were changing. Rudd ignored him and kept training, but Balac didn't take the hint. He started copying Rudd's moves. Finally, Rudd snapped and asked if he was picking a fight. Balac apologized and said it wasn't like that at all. He just hadn't seen anyone train so intensely. He came from a family of bodybuilders, but even his parents weren't that dedicated. He was impressed by Rudd and asked to be his disciple. Rudd refused. He introduced himself as a first-year student, and Balac did the same. Later, in weapon class, their instructor told everyone to choose a weapon. Each student had to master one. While others went for swords and spears, Henneth approached the teacher and said she was going to be a mage and didn't need a weapon. The teacher disagreed. Emergencies could always come up, and she needed a backup weapon. Rudd stepped in and advised Henneth to take a short dagger. He told her that with her mana, she could control it over a short distance, and in his previous life, Henneth had actually been a master of the dagger. After she reluctantly took the weapon, Rudd picked up a sword and gave it a practice swing. The teacher noticed the smoothness and expertise in his motion. Rudd asked if he could try more weapons. The teacher said there were no rules against it, just that most students couldn't handle multiple weapons well. But Rudd insisted. He picked up a spear, then another large sword. The teacher asked what his background was, and he replied that he was a hunter and his parents had been killed by dragons. Hearing this, the teacher softened. It was rare to find someone with that kind of backstory still standing strong, so he allowed Rudd to train with all three weapons. As Rudd walked away, Henneth approached and asked if the story about his parents was true. When he confirmed, she apologized for being rude earlier. Before they could say much more, a commotion erupted from Class BC Urias. They went to check it out. They found Balac in a heated argument with the instructors. He refused to choose a weapon, declaring it was against his family's principles. The Steros family only used their bodies in battle. Balac was furious, defying orders and heading toward Rudd. The teacher asked why he was walking away, and Rudd jumped in, claiming they were friends. He assumed they would let Balac do what he wanted like in the past, but to his shock, the teacher said Balac would fail if he didn't pick a weapon. Rudd quickly realized that his involvement had changed the past again. things weren't unfolding the way they had before. Balac, stubborn as ever, declared that he'd gladly fail if that's what it took. He wouldn't disgrace his family by picking up a weapon. Rudd had to act fast. If Balac was expelled, Rudd wouldn't be able to accomplish everything on his own. He grabbed a knuckle protector from nearby and handed it to Balac. Henneth laughed, saying it wasn't a weapon, but Rudd insisted it could be classified as a modern-day gauntlet. Technically, it met the requirements. The teacher hesitated but finally approved it. Their first day of class came to a close. Rudd reflected that the week had been calm so far. Maybe that was typical. First classes were usually light, and they allowed instructors to assess the potential of each student. At least, Rudd thought, he'd made himself visible. As they walked back to the dorms, Henneth berated Balac. She mocked him for making a scene over refusing to take a weapon and said not everyone in his family had to be as dumb as he was. Balac snapped back, and they got into a shouting match. But their argument was interrupted when a group of upperclassmen approached. Their leader was a smug boy named Wilhelm. He didn't address Henneth, but instead taunted Rudd and Balac directly. He accused them of attention-seeking, one for asking for 3 weapons, and the other for refusing one altogether. Rudd had seen guys like Wilhelm before. In his past life, boys like this had insulted him and his family, and he had usually responded by beating them to a pulp. But now, he wanted to handle things differently. Still, when Wilhelm pushed, Rudd warned him that he could take him down without even using a weapon. Wilhelm didn't believe him. He charged. Rudd dodged effortlessly, and Wilhelm stumbled. Embarrassed, Wilhelm reached for a weapon, despite the school's rules. This was Rudd's chance to test out a move he'd learned in his past life. The Steros family's signature move, bare-handed parrying. He disarmed Wilhelm and knocked him down with a few precise hits. The teacher showed up, shocked to see a first-year student disarm someone with just their hands. She asked Rudd to see her after class. Even Balac was stunned. He recognized the technique. It belonged to his family. Only grown men in this family were supposed to know it. He asked Rudd if he was some long-lost brother, but Rudd deflected, saying he had learned it from a friend. Balac believed him, but Henneth didn't. She insisted he was lying and said Balac was being too trusting. Balac shrugged it off and said everyone had secrets, including her. Henneth insisted she wasn't their friend, so Balac invited her to become one. Rudd, meanwhile, was just glad no one had died yet. He silently promised himself that he wouldn't let anyone die, not this time. He went to see the Class B teacher, Crier, who called him in after the fight. She told him she didn't blame him. She had only summoned him to get a better sense of who he was. And now that she had seen his respectful attitude and skill firsthand, she had a good impression of him. He had bowed before speaking, apologized, and explained that he'd acted only to defend his friends. She let him go without punishment. Afterward, Claire sat lost in thought when another teacher, Daniel, entered the office. He reminded her that she had insisted on holding the teachers' meeting in her own office, even though it wasn't the usual spot. Soon, other teachers arrived, Arthur Winston of Class D and Damian Grace of Class C. Arthur immediately started complaining that Claire had wasted school funds on decorating her office. She insisted everything was essential until Damian pointed out the vase. They eventually moved on from the bickering to discuss the freshman class. This year, they all agreed, seemed especially promising. The students had talent, but they'd face challenges ahead. It was up to the teachers to mentally prepare them. Then, they shifted focus to standout students. Claire mentioned 2 students from her class, a lunatic and a fool. The lunatic was Balac. Daniel said he had 2 exceptional students as well, Henneth, who came from a distinguished family, and Rudd. He said Rudd might end up being the best student of their generation. Claire added that Rudd had defeated a weapon-wielding student with his bare hands and that she wanted him for herself since she specialized in bodybuilding. Daniel disagreed. He believed Rudd belonged with him. After all, Rudd was clearly a sword prodigy. Arthur cut in and said maybe Damian should take Rudd, since he was also skilled with spears. But Damian reminded them that the final choice would be Rudd's. They reviewed Rudd's origin. He was from Desol, a city that had been destroyed by dragons. Arthur remembered that Daniel and his master had fought there. The fact that Rudd had survived such a tragedy made them wonder, was he sharpening his skills to seek revenge? Arthur challenged Daniel's claim that Rudd would be the best. He said his own student had monstrous eyes. Claire began her physical strength class with a straightforward order. Train, exercise, build your body. Rudd didn't need to be told twice. He knew how important it was to increase his strength before the sparring sessions began. He threw himself into training with complete focus and managed to master his breathing techniques in a short time. His efforts paid off. He could feel his progress. Meanwhile, Balac trained nearby, but unlike Rudd, he was making loud grunting noises with every lift. Rudd warned him that the noise was getting out of hand. Balac countered, saying that breathing properly was essential for lifting heavy weights. Rudd explained that it wasn't about making noise but about stability. He advised Balac to grip the weight properly first, then exhale. Balac gave it a try and immediately felt the difference. Grinning, he told Rudd he had no choice now. He was officially his teacher. Henith soon joined them, wrinkling her nose in disgust. She insulted them both, saying they stank after training for 3 straight hours. Balac told her to join in if she didn't want to stay skinny forever. He even boasted that the women in his family were more muscular than most of the students here. Rudd left the pair to continue bickering and said he was going to grab a drink. Henith turned to Balac and asked if he was coming too, but Balac refused. He couldn't risk losing any of his muscle mass from walking. On his way, Rudd spotted someone that made his blood freeze. Crier, the sword saint, a woman blessed with the talent of the devil, and the only knight in his previous life who had ever stood on equal ground with his brother. He had fought her once, and it ended badly. She had humiliated him and even taunted him by comparing him to Aesir. He had never had the chance to settle the score. Now, here she was again, casually standing there. Overwhelmed by mixed emotions, Rudd snapped. He didn't approach her calmly or respectfully. Instead, he shouted at her to get lost. She raised her eyebrows at the outburst, crushed the can she was holding, and hurled it at him. He dodged it easily. She threw again, and again, he avoided it. She accused him of being angry just because she entered the school through a recommendation. He dismissed it. He didn't care how she got in. He just wanted her out of his sight. What stunned her, though, was that he was the first person ever to dodge her throws. She narrowed her eyes and asked for his name. After she left, Rudd noticed his side had been grazed. She had landed a hit without him even realizing it. He headed for the infirmary. Claire found out Leon had injured yet another student. Frustrated, she stormed out, determined to punish her. But another teacher held her back, suggesting that Arthur should handle it since he was Leon's guardian and also part of the Dragon Annihilation Unit. Claire begrudgingly agreed. 3 days later, all the students gathered for the combined sparring lecture between Class A and B. Claire explained how the process worked. Every student would fight twice, and they couldn't choose the same opponent twice. It wasn't just practice, it was an appraisal. The instructors would use these matches to identify standout talent. It didn't matter who your family was, your performance in this ring would define you. Henith was called up first. Everyone expected her to play it safe. She was a wizard after all. But instead of challenging another mage, she called out a swordsman. The instructors exchanged glances. That was practically suicide. Wizards were typically slower, easier to hit, but Henith wasn't intimidated. Her opponent underestimated her too, expecting slow fireballs he could easily dodge. But she moved like lightning, suddenly appearing behind him and striking with precision. She won, easily. After the match, she looked toward her idol, Liana, asking for her thoughts. Liana praised her boldness and speed, noting she was definitely not an ordinary mage. Even Arthur remarked that they might need to get a specialized fireball instructor just for her. Next up was Wilhelm. He challenged Rudd, saying he wasn't ready during their last fight. Rudd didn't waste time. He beat Wilhelm into the ground until the guy collapsed again. Then came Rudd's turn to pick his opponent. He chose Balac, but Balac flat out refused. He said they were friends, and his family's principles forbid fighting friends. Rudd, however, wouldn't let him off easy. He had seen how powerful Balac became in his past life, and if he wanted to build a stronger future, Balac had to grow even faster this time. Rudd baited him, saying the Steros weren't cowards. Provoked, Balac agreed. As they prepared to fight, Rudd remembered their first meeting in the past. Back then, after Leon had destroyed him, Rudd had gone on a rampage, challenging anyone and everyone at school. Eventually, his brother sent Balac to stop him. When Balac delivered his message, Rudd rejected it and cursed both him and his brother. He told Balac to hit him if he dared. Balac, sticking to his family values, accepted the challenge and threw the first punch. Even then, Rudd had known Balac was strong, but hearing Balac compliment him at the time had felt like mockery, considering how weak and beaten he had been. Now, in this life, they clashed again. Blow after blow, they exchanged powerful strikes. Rudd dodged a particularly deadly move, and Balac was stunned. He hadn't expected that. Rudd smirked, telling him that he saw the feint and wasn't about to get caught. As they continued, Rudd realized just how tanky Balac really was. His muscles had merged with mana, forming an armor tougher than iron. Normal attacks weren't getting through. So Rudd changed tactics. He shifted to a slower, more precise approach, aiming for the gaps in Balac's defense. Balac noticed Rudd's strikes were becoming harder to predict. Even with his massive strength and defense, Balac began to feel the pressure. He could tell Rudd was using a variation of the Steros family's own fighting style. But how? Still, Balac wasn't going to back down. He focused, trying to read Rudd's every move, trying to catch up with his speed. Their fists collided again. Rudd was relieved. His friend was growing stronger. He even called Balac a genius. Finally, Balac went for one final, crushing move, but Rudd didn't dodge. He simply stood there. With a confident smile, he told Balac it had been a good fight. He was strong, but not stronger than him. That was the same line Balac had used in the past. Then, Rudd pulled out his sword and slashed Balac cleanly, ending the match. Balac acknowledged defeat. The crowd was stunned. Was that really a student duel? Claire praised Rudd's control and skill. He'd stayed composed and fought like a seasoned dragon slayer. Arthur and Damien were equally impressed. Even though they hadn't used mana, their skills were at the level of professionals. Damien, who hadn't paid much attention before, admitted that Rudd's final attack was unpredictable and flawless. Daniel noted that Rudd's swordsmanship reminded him of his old master. His technique was clean, efficient, no wasted movement. After the match, Rudd, Heneth, and Balac headed to the school cafe. Heneth grumbled that the food was bland compared to what she could get outside. Rudd scoffed. Why would anyone waste money when the food here was free? Balac, meanwhile, praised the richness of the cafeteria food. Rudd teased Heneth about her attitude toward money. She shrugged it off, saying money was just paper. Of course, she could say that. She was loaded. So was Balac. Rudd was the only one in their group who came from nothing. Heneth offered to buy him a meal outside the school next time. Balac said he could handle his own expenses. Rudd politely refused Heneth's offer, not wanting to owe her anything. At that moment, two figures entered the cafe. Guild leaders. Rudd recognized them immediately. In his past life, he hadn't interacted with them much. They had died fighting dragons before he joined a guild, but now they stood in front of him. Roderick Riddler and Abel, the leaders of two of the city's top guilds. They introduced themselves and praised Rudd's performance during the sparring match. Heneth raised an eyebrow and asked why they were slumming it in the student cafe. They said they came to reminisce about their school days. She asked about Liana, but they said she had left already. Abel extended an offer to Rudd to join their guild after graduation. It was a prestigious opportunity, but Rudd declined. He valued his independence too much. However, he did propose a deal. If they could help him find his brother, they'd earn a powerful future ally. It was a tempting trade, and they agreed. After they left, Heneth turned to him, incredulous that he had turned down such a big offer. She also asked if he'd checked the letter the instructors had handed them after the sparring match. Rudd hadn't looked at the envelope yet. In his past life, he'd never received a letter worth reading during sparring evaluations, just generic or negative remarks. So he wasn't eager to open this one. Heneth, full of confidence, claimed she didn't even need to read hers since praise was guaranteed for someone from her family. She turned to Rudd, assuming his hesitation was about his brother. He remembered that Heneth had an older sister who had fallen into a coma. Maybe that's why she was being so gentle with him lately. Balac curiously asked about his brother, and Rudd described him as courageous, a bit of a fool, but the kind of fool who would die just to protect his little brother. A fool who was also one of the greatest dragon slayers. Balac smiled and said if his brother was truly that strong, then there was no way he was dead. Finally, Heneth had enough waiting. She snatched the envelope from Rudd's hands and opened it. What she saw stunned her. It wasn't just one teacher's note. It was signed by several instructors. That many signatures could only mean one thing. Without a word, Rudd got up and headed toward the teachers' offices. He already knew what this meant. When he arrived, the teachers greeted him calmly, each clearly waiting to pitch themselves. They told him what he had expected. They wanted him to choose his personal professor. Each one took turns explaining why he should pick them. Rudd heard them out but had already made his decision. He chose Daniel. Daniel was shocked and happy but asked why Rudd had chosen him. Rudd replied with a condition. Daniel had to take him on as a direct disciple. He wanted full training in the sky-piercing technique, the same one Daniel's master had passed to him. In his previous life, it was Rudd's brother who had been Daniel's chosen heir. Now that his brother wasn't here, Rudd felt he had to step up and take that spot. Daniel asked why he wanted the technique so badly. Rudd didn't hesitate. He wanted power. He was tired of watching people die, helpless to do anything. He needed power to protect the people who mattered to him. Daniel listened quietly and finally nodded. He said he had considered offering that very thing before, but now that Rudd had asked, he would make it official. But he had a request too. Rudd had to agree to be trained by all the instructors, not just him. His talent was too wide-reaching, and he needed guidance in multiple areas. Rudd hesitated. If he accepted, it might take up too much of the teacher's time and slow down other students' progress. It wasn't normal for 4 instructors to focus on one person, but he knew he needed the power, so he agreed. Meanwhile, Claire prepared to discipline Leon. The timing worked perfectly, as Leon had just arrived for a supplemental lesson. But when Claire tried to give her a stern lecture, Leon asked if she had something personal against her. Still, the lesson began. with Claire driving a painful blow into Leon's gut. This was more than a typical class. After the lesson, Leon sat alone on the stairs outside, tears in her eyes. She was convinced Rudd had reported her to Claire. That's why she had gotten punished. She knew she was in the wrong for hitting Rudd, but still, she hadn't expected him to run to a teacher. She also felt bad about the way things unfolded. Rudd happened to walk by at that moment and was caught off guard. Leon, crying? That was unheard of. Even in his past life, he had only seen her cry once, when she lost her adoptive mother, the leader of the Dragon Annihilation Troop. That grief had hardened her and shaped who she became. Now, seeing her vulnerable again, he felt conflicted. He walked over and asked why she was crying. She accused him of snitching on her. He immediately denied it, saying he never told Claire anything. It was his friends who overreacted and ended up drawing attention to the situation. He apologized sincerely for speaking rudely to her and handed her a handkerchief. She wiped her face and then her nose with it. He made a face, saying he hadn't meant for her to blow her nose in it, but let it slide. As he turned to leave, she asked why he was avoiding her. He said he'd rather not have more misunderstandings between them, and maybe it was better they didn't interact. She called out after him, telling him at least to say goodbye properly. Watching her walk off, he told himself that she didn't need help. In his past life, she'd trained alone and grown immensely strong. Even now, she didn't need him. But, to his surprise, they both arrived at the same destination, Hall A. That meant they had been assigned the same personal instructor, Daniel. She asked what was wrong when she noticed his reaction. He replied that he'd expected her to be under Claire, not Daniel. That was how it had been in his past life. She practically shouted in protest, saying she could never study under Claire, that she was the devil herself. Once again, it was clear, the past was already changing. Training with Daniel began. He gave them basic instruction at first, but then said they would learn through sparring. In simple terms, that meant getting beaten up, and beaten they were. By the end of the session, both Rudd and Leon were lying on the floor, completely wiped out. As Daniel walked out, he mentioned that their lessons would alternate between group and solo sessions, depending on how he saw fit. Once he was gone, Rudd mumbled a sarcastic comment under his breath. Leon, irritated again, warned him to be careful with his words. He fired back, asking if she wasn't angry that they had just taken a beating they could have avoided. She snapped that the beatings were necessary. They were weak, and this was how they would get stronger. Daniel wasn't cruel. He was doing what needed to be done. She told Rudd that if he thought this was tough, he should try training with Claire. That touched a nerve. He didn't want to talk about her experience with Claire. She picked up on his hesitation and asked if he felt sorry for her. He turned to leave, but she stopped him with another question. If he really felt sorry, could he at least teach her the grappling technique he had criticized earlier? He refused, suggesting she ask a teacher. But the only grappling expert was Claire, and Leon was adamant she wouldn't go to her. She begged Rudd to teach her instead. It felt strange. In his past life, they weren't even friends, but now here she was, asking for his help. Since she was one of the top talents in the school, it didn't hurt to accept, so he agreed. The Dragon Annihilation Academy, Iridium, stood proudly at the heart of the Alpia Kingdom, thanks to its importance being the home of future demon slayers. It enjoyed the finest infrastructure, with support directly from the royal family. Yet, even with all its prestige, the administration understood that students would occasionally crave freedom. So, they were allowed to leave campus during weekends and special holidays. On one such break, Rudd and Balac had planned to spend the entire day catching up on sleep. But Heeneth had other plans. She called them up and insisted they help her carry some books to the city. Both boys groaned and complained, saying they just wanted to rest. Heeneth, unfazed, bribed them with the promise of food. As expected, that worked. She handed the stack of books to Rudd, who, in turn, casually dumped them onto Balac. Balac stared at him in disbelief, asking why he had passed them along. Rudd simply asked if Balac had any money. When Balac admitted he didn't, Rudd replied that the one without money should carry the books. That shut him up. As they walked through the city, Heeneth strolled around like she owned the place, greeting merchants, chatting with locals, and buying little things along the way. Eventually, she announced they could finally rest at a nearby restaurant. The moment they stepped in, the staff lit up. Heeneth was welcomed like royalty, escorted to her seat, and treated with the utmost respect. She confidently ordered the same meal for everyone, but allowed Balac a different dish, something to help with muscle building. Rudd glanced at the menu and nearly had a heart attack. The prices were outrageous. One meal here could cover his expenses for an entire month. When the food arrived, Balac asked for seconds. Heeneth refused him outright, but when Rudd remained quiet, she sweetly asked if he wanted more. That unsettled Rudd. She had been acting overly kind ever since learning about his brother. In his past life, their relationship was more of a rivalry than friendship. He quietly admitted to himself that he preferred that version of her. Tough, teasing, and distant. Her kindness felt awkward, and she still treated Balac poorly. When he requested more food, she insulted him, asking if he was feeding his brain or his biceps, and guessing his skull was probably filled with muscle. Balac looked at Rudd with puppy dog eyes, silently hoping Heeneth would treat him the way she treated Rudd. But when she caught that glance, she immediately accused Rudd of speaking ill of her. He quickly denied it, saying he'd much rather stay in her good graces. Checking the time, Rudd suddenly remembered. He had a prior commitment with Leon at 8 p.m. He quickly excused himself and left. Meanwhile, Leon had already arrived and was waiting patiently. When it was 5 minutes past the hour, she checked her watch. Disappointment crept in. She thought to herself that this was the first time she'd ever had someone to talk to as a friend. And now, she feared he had forgotten. Maybe, she thought, he had many friends and just forgot about her. But just as those thoughts darkened her mind, the door opened. Rudd walked in. She playfully scolded him for being late, claiming he should have arrived 10 minutes early. He apologized, explaining he had just come from the capital, where he was out with friends. When she sniffed the air and realized he smelled like food, she asked if he'd eaten. He nodded and casually mentioned that one of his friends had treated him. That shocked her. "You went to the capital?" she repeated, almost not believing it. She confessed that she had never been there before. He offered to take her next time, next Saturday, to be exact. She lit up instantly, thrilled by the promise. She bounced around him, bombarding him with questions about the capital, what it looked like, what was there to see. Rudd sighed, overwhelmed. She had been so quiet in his previous life, but now she was chatty beyond belief. She explained that her mother, the commander of the Annihilation Unit, used to scold her constantly for talking too much. As she continued her rambling, he lightly tossed a glove into her mouth just to shut her up. With that handled, they began their training session. Rudd told her he'd teach her a modified version of the Steros grappling techniques. Since she lacked the brute strength of this family, this version would be more refined for her. He warned her that Claire, her teacher, knew many grappling styles from around the world, so it would be impossible to avoid all her hits. The goal instead was to reduce the number of hits she took. Leon doubted herself. How could she defend herself at all? Rudd demonstrated a dodging maneuver, twisting his body like a snake in a zigzag. She asked about the strange technique. He called it the snake walk, a method he had developed on his own to make his movements unpredictable. When she asked if he was a genius for creating something so effective, he internally disagreed. It had taken him 2 years to invent, 1 year to master, and another to perfect. But Leon had picked up the basics in under 10 minutes. She was the real genius. Trying to mimic the move, she stumbled. He swept her legs, causing her to crash to the floor. She groaned, but refused to get up. Rudd, completely unbothered, told her he'd keep teaching her until she mastered it, even if it killed her. So, she might as well get up and keep going. Later that day, Rudd returned to his room. He lay in bed, reflecting on how smoothly everything was going. The relationships he was building in this life were vastly different from the ones he remembered. But he told himself that this was necessary. This time, he wouldn't let anyone die. He would gather the right people, build the right team, and face the enemies that destroyed them before. To do that, he had to take his brother's place. He had to master the sky-piercing technique. Training resumed with Daniel. The two faced off again, their swords clashing with force and precision. Daniel, as always, was unpredictable. He fought with a playful but dangerous rhythm, making it impossible for Rudd to get too comfortable. Then Daniel changed tactics. He extended his fist toward Rudd. Confused, Rudd asked what he was doing. They were supposed to be dueling with swords. Daniel simply replied that he had his whimsical moments. Rudd was struggling to keep up. Daniel was still far ahead of him. To buy time, Rudd pretended to fall back, making it look like he was retreating. Daniel narrowed his eyes, wondering if Rudd was setting a trap. Curiosity got the better of him, and he moved in. Just as Daniel reached striking distance, Rudd launched a defensive slash followed by a powerful counter. This was the essence of the sky-piercing technique, a strike that blocked incoming attacks and retaliated with equal force. In his past life, Rudd had learned the technique just to catch up to his brother, but now, he understood it required something beyond swordplay. Daniel praised Rudd's performance. His slashes were refined, impressively so, but Rudd shrugged off the compliment, saying Daniel was still holding back. Daniel agreed. It was time to move beyond the basics. He explained that true sky-piercing wasn't just about swords. Anyone could copy the form, but only a successor could master the core of the technique, mana management. This technique utilized a system far different from the usual method of storing mana in the heart. Instead, it relied on mana imprints and a subspace known as the Heavenly Spirit. Daniel showed him the mark on his hand where his mana imprint was engraved. It was through this imprint that the heavenly spirit collected external mana and channeled it, not stored, in the user's heart. Rudd remembered that his brother also had such an imprint. The pieces were falling into place. Daniel asked Rudd if he was practicing another mana system, but Rudd said no. In truth, he had used alchemy-based mana control in his past life, completely incompatible with the sky-piercing path. Daniel instructed Rudd to sit and asked where he wanted his imprint placed. Rudd chose the back of his hand, just like his brother. As Daniel engraved the mark, he warned it would sting. But sting was an understatement. It felt like his entire arm was on fire. In an instant, Rudd was no longer in the training room. He stood in a radiant, heavenly realm, flooded with generations of accumulated mana. He heard a voice call out, "That's you, little child." But before he could respond, he was pulled back to reality. Daniel asked him how his first experience with the piercing sky had felt. Rudd called it incredible. Daniel said gaining control over the heavenly spirit was like growing a new organ. It would take time to fully adjust. But what stunned him was that Rudd, in just minutes, had already begun drawing mana from that space. That was far beyond what a beginner should be able to do. Daniel silently wondered, who was this kid? Rudd remembered how mana levels used to be represented by circles in the heart when practicing alchemy, but with the sky-piercing technique, strength was measured in wings. The original Sky Sword Immortal had 7. His brother had reached 7 as well, and had dreamed of 8. Rudd, right now, only had 1. Daniel told him that mana imprints weren't etched into the flesh, they were carved into the soul. That meant even in death, a successor's knowledge and spirit would remain in the heavenly spirit. Rudd recalled that he had been there, but hadn't seen his brother. That could only mean one thing. His brother had not passed on. He had been taken, likely to another dimension, by Sartnan, the Void Lord. Rudd knew now he had to find Sartnan. That was the only way to uncover the truth. As Rudd stepped out from the training hall, still processing everything he had just learned, he was greeted by Henneth's shouting. She was irritated, demanding to know why he was so late. Did he expect her to train back by herself? He casually told her to go on ahead without him, but she flat out refused. She said there was no way she was dealing with a blockhead like Balac alone. Offended, Balac insisted he wasn't stupid and began questioning whether someone had put a curse on him, deciding that maybe he needed to train his brain to snap out of it. The three walked together as they headed to their next sessions. Henneth asked Rudd how his classes had gone. He replied that they were just like regular lectures, nothing special. But Henneth wasn't buying it. She pointed out that he had one-on-one classes with 4 separate instructors and that other students had started complaining about how unfair it was. If that wasn't special, what was? She then asked if he'd met Damien yet and whether he'd seen his face without the mask. Rumor had it that Damien had severe mysophobia. Rudd remembered that meeting well. When he'd arrived at Damien's office, Damien had silently poured him a cup of tea. They sat without exchanging a word. Eventually, Damien asked if Rudd enjoyed the tea, adding that it was typically served only to dignitaries. Rudd had found it odd. Damien hadn't even tasted the tea himself. After that brief interaction, the meeting ended. Rudd told Henneth that they didn't do anything special, just drank tea. Turning the question around, he asked how their classes had gone. Balac lit up. He was clearly excited about his session with Claire. He claimed she had praised his muscles, exactly what he wanted to hear. Rudd wasn't surprised. In his past life, Claire and Balac had gotten along famously due to their shared obsession with physical strength. Henneth, on the other hand, looked frustrated. She said her instructor had told her that flame magic wasn't her strong suit and that she should consider studying a different type of magic. That ticked her off. Flame magic was rare and powerful. Rudd tried to reassure her, suggesting that if she didn't like her teacher, maybe she should request a different one. But Henneth shut down the idea. There weren't any other magic instructors available, so complaining wouldn't help. While they walked, the student council president, Jeremy, approached. He greeted them with a familiar smile and said he'd seen Rudd before. He teased that Rudd and Henneth were the easiest freshmen to identify, probably because of all the buzz surrounding them. Jeremy admitted that upperclassmen were grumbling about how much individual attention Rudd was getting from the professors. Rudd, wary, asked if Jeremy had come to pass along those complaints. Jeremy laughed and said no. He had a different reason. He invited Rudd to join the student council. They needed people like him, and Jeremy believed Rudd would be a great fit. Rudd instantly refused. Jeremy assured him it wasn't a mercenary offer. He wasn't trying to buy loyalty. But he then added something that made Rudd pause. He claimed he could tell from the bruises on Rudd's body that he had once been a mercenary. Jeremy said he didn't like meddling in people's business, but his instincts and insight earned him the nickname, the Detective. He knew Rudd was on a personal mission, likely involving a missing brother. At that point, Rudd's expression darkened. He wanted nothing to do with Jeremy. He remembered who this guy was in his past life. a man who earned the title decision maker for his cold, self-serving choices. Those very decisions had led to the deaths of innocent people during the war. Rudd firmly declined again and walked away, determined to avoid any association with him. Jeremy, undeterred, said he was still interested in Rudd nonetheless. After he left, Heeneth tried to smooth things over, apologizing for Rudd's behavior. Jeremy said it was fine. He slipped a sealed note into one of their books and left with a polite smile. When Rudd returned, Heeneth demanded to know why he had been so rude. Rudd replied simply that Jeremy was trouble. Nothing good could come from trusting a guy like him. Curious, they opened the letter Jeremy had left. It was a warning. Be careful of Damien Grace. Rudd's blood boiled. If anyone needed to be watched, it was Jeremy. In their past life, Damien had been the first casualty, driven to suicide, and the one who pushed him to that point had been none other than Jeremy. Rudd reminded himself, Jeremy didn't technically kill Damien, but he manipulated and pressured him so severely that Damien saw no other way out. Rudd wasn't going to let history repeat itself. Determined to intervene early, Rudd left his dorm and joined Leon on the bus to the capital. As he sat down, she immediately questioned why he was always late for their meetings. He insisted he had arrived on time, but she argued that being punctual meant showing up at least 10 minutes early. He countered that he had sacrificed his weekend just to accompany her, but she reminded him that he was the one who invited her out in the first place. Their bickering didn't end until they reached the capital. Stepping off the bus, Leon's eyes lit up. She was amazed by the sheer size and crowd. Compared to the Dragon Annihilation Troupe, the capital was a bustling giant. When she asked where they were going, Rudd replied that she could go anywhere she wanted. He would simply carry her bags. But she refused. She declared that he was her guide, and as the guide, he had to lead the way. He playfully teased her, suggesting that she should just go shopping. After all, that's what girls usually do during outings. So she did. She walked into a clothing shop and spotted a white dress. She asked Rudd what he thought of it. He responded nonchalantly, saying it was just white. Still, she liked it and tried it on. Satisfied with the look, she bought it. Then, she surprised Rudd by asking the staff to pick out something for him. When he came out dressed in a new outfit, she smiled approvingly and paid for both their clothes. After shopping, they headed to a restaurant for a meal. As they finished eating and began walking back, Leon talked about how delicious the food was and offered to pay, but Rudd insisted on covering the bill. He said since she had already bought him clothes, he would feel shameless if he let her pay for the food too. She glanced at him and commented that the outfit suited him. He caught her staring and asked what she was looking at. Leon then asked him a more serious question. Did he have comrades back when he worked as a mercenary? Rudd replied yes, although what he was actually recalling were his former dragon-slaying allies. She followed up. Did he consider them like family? He hesitated, admitting he wasn't sure. He even told her he might just be talking nonsense. She looked at him and said she'd never met anyone like him before. Her words struck a nerve. Rudd snapped. He told her he was done wasting time and turned to leave. But before he could walk away, she hit him from behind. She wasn't letting him go yet. She reminded him of her mother's teachings, about how friendship is built on mutual support, and declared that she was changing their plans. Now, instead of wandering the capital, they were going to her home. She wanted to show him what family really meant. She was going to introduce him to hers. If you enjoyed the story so far, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to You May Recap, and stay tuned for the next video.